We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Yeah, I want to get into this because this is a really great subject, Clint. Thank you so much. I do want to get into the whole mental health. And I know you created a really great program, and it's called Small Changes, Big Impact, 1% per day transformation system, and it only takes you like 15 minutes a day. And I definitely want to get into that. The mental health thing is really big right now, and you're right. And I actually have implemented certain things in my life. I had some in place before COVID, but certainly when COVID hit, and one of them is, shutting the phone down. I talked my husband into, unless it's a real emergency, he doesn't respond to texts and phone calls after a certain time at night, just because he needs to have that downtime. You need the brain space to just do nothing.
Yeah. My phone goes into sleep mode every night at 9:45.
Okay.
And it doesn't go off again until 6 a.m. And the only way anybody can reach me is if they call twice. And the only people that know that are either my clients, my high acuity clients, because I let them know that, or my family members. They're the only ones that can actually break through and get me. And most of my clients, because of the way that I changed my practices, I work with a lot of people that don't have a lot of high acuity stuff, just because I did that for so long that I'm like, I needed a break. So I switched to more what in the therapy world and life coaching world we call kind of a walking wounded, where you have depression, you do have anxiety, you may have occasional suicidal ideations, but nothing to where it's like you're always suicidal, you're always feeling those different ways, where it's a lot of and it's mostly anxiety, depression, and just a lot of life stuff. That's what I found a lot, is that all of us are still recovering from how COVID upheaved our lives, and we still don't even really fully know the impact of it, especially, for the people that I've worked with that lost loved ones during COVID and couldn't have a funeral and couldn't properly grieve and all these different things. And it's been such a horrible, yet for me, fascinating kind of transformation of culture and society.
I know. And, the ones that I really worry about too is, the elderly, because they really got isolated, and our children.
Yep.
Their whole social
For the
way
first
of,
couple of years got completely messed up. Yeah. And we are just now seeing those kids entering into preschool and kindergarten. And so we're now seeing actually the effects of what that did to them, of being so isolated. And it's been really kind of surprising that it actually stunted a lot of them by at least a couple of years, to where them getting used to just being around people in person. And, it's amazing how we have all this technology and all these things and all these abilities to connect, but yet still the basic human one-on-one physical interaction is still literally written in our DNA from 300,000 years of, ancestral history. And that although this can mimic it pretty good, we instinctively know, no, it's not. And
we're not in the same room. The energy isn't there. It definitely makes a difference. I know I do my therapy online and it works really well, but you're right. There's something about being in the same room and connecting. We need that. We really do.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the whole COVID thing. And now that we're coming out of it, there's so much that we're still unveiling about that, right? And how our kids are being affected, and just how people in general. Because I'll be honest with you, I worked from home during COVID, and it worked out really well for me. And I actually thrived in that. I'll be honest with you, because I didn't realize how much working in the office was affecting me. And we had this big open room, and I just remember, like, weeks before that, just I could feel the anxiety when I would go into the office, right? And then COVID hit, and then I'm home, and I thought, oh, I'm just going to be home 2 weeks, right? I seriously thought I was going to be just 2 weeks. And at first it was unnerving to be at home and be quiet. And I felt like I was doing something wrong. It was just
Yeah.
kind of weird. I'm sure everybody kind of
Mm-hmm.
felt that way. But then once I realized, okay, we're here for a little while, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I was able to focus and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
then after a while, it does get kind of weird.
Yes.
And so I got to where I was going to the office part of the time,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of helped alleviate that.
Yeah.
But the office environment I worked in was so toxic that
Mm-hmm.
I quickly felt that difference, and I had to get out of that situation. But I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of people like that. It's confusing.
It's well, and the confusing thing is that for most of us, having that separation between work and home is vital because we're not good at creating that boundary psychologically within ourselves. Having a space to go to where that is work and then a space that is home is really necessary. Because I worked from home for a decade before COVID.
Mm,
I lived in California and I was working remote for a company down in Southern California and I lived in Northern California. And so I did that for a decade and it was probably the worst decade of my life because even though I closed the door to the office, work was always there. So
yeah.
I had to take these steps to begin to really separate myself from work, where I had to remove it from my cell phone. So anytime there was email, I couldn't get it until the next day. I couldn't
Hmm.
have it on my phone. I had to make sure that this is a hard stop time for work. When I'm done with work, I'm done with work. So I had to build like an invisible psychological box that I stuck
Hmm.
next to the door of the office where I unloaded work and locked it in the box and then left the office and shut the door, and then that's where work was. But it's one of those things that it was a process that took me years to master, and it still was really difficult because
Hmm.
naturally we get so much out of work because it's such an A to B process. You do your work, you do your work, you get rewarded, you're good. But unlike the rest of life where you don't really see the net outcome for it
Hmm.
until a lot later on. And so that's why it's easy to get sucked into, oh, I'll just check my email really quick and then you're gone for 2 hours, or I'll just
Yeah.
go do this. And
Yeah.
then you get sucked back into work really quickly, which is why creating really strict boundaries for yourself when you work from home by making sure that your work area is not visible to you. It has to be screened off from the rest of it. It can't be like, oh, I'll just have my workstation in the living room where my computer is and stuff, and that'll be fine. You need to screen that off so you can't see it because while it's there psychologically, you won't
Hmm.
be able to not help thinking about, well, what do I have to do tomorrow? What's that next big task I have to work on? What's that next thing or that next problem that I'm going to have to anticipate? Because that's one of the reasons why I now have an office that I pay for that I could do all my work from home. I could do therapy just online. I could do all that stuff, but I chose to have a separate space to work in. And even when I do virtual therapy, I still come to the office and do it because I know for me, I need that separation. Because
Hmm.
if I don't have it, I would work 24 hours a day. I know
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I mean, because I have my office here at home. So I have my
Mhm.
office and then I have my little podcast studio here,
Mhm.
but it is literally a separate room.
Yep.
And I have to walk in here, I have to make effort. I have to,
Yeah.
I can walk by and the door shut and it won't even
Yeah.
catch my attention.
Mhm.
So if I'm coming in here, it's for a purpose.
Yeah.
And the thing that I'm trying to improve upon is my
Mhm.
hours and just
Yes.
really blocking that time off. But even within that time,
Mhm.
I will have like I'll work on one project. I'll set a
Mhm.
timer.
Mhm.
Let's just say 25 minutes,
Yep.
depending on what I'm working on. When that timer's up, I get up, I walk out of the room. I go outside. If it's nice outside, I go
Yes.
outside. I
Mhm.
get some fresh air. I walk
Yep.
around. I do something different, and then I'll come back. And that
And
seems to have
actually,
done well for
not
me.
only actually psychologically speaking, and from different studies, it's shown that by doing that, by breaking up your momentum when you're working on these projects, you think, oh well, if I'm I'm in a flow space or I'm in this momentum, I need to keep going or I'm going to lose it. But the thing is that really what they've shown is 30 minutes with a 5-minute break is one of the best things you can do for yourself psychologically. And it actually improves your ability to process through a
Hmm.
problem and to actually make it the most effective solutions out of it because it gives you that moment to stop, go do something else, let your mind kind of wander and just relax a little bit.
Kind of
And then when you
rest.
come back, you can jump right back into it. And all of a sudden, you may have 3 or 4 or 5 extra
Yeah.
ideas because you have this space to give yourself a breath. Because the thing that thing that people don't realize is that the reason why burnout is more prevalent now than ever, and why people have that so much, is because of that always on mentality of like, well, I have to always be available to work, and work is starting to expect that you're on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
They expect that as well. And I'm like, no, if you really think about it, every hour, think about it this way. If you work for your job, if you get paid like hourly, and you give them a free hour of work every day, that means in the course of a full month, you've now given them 20 extra hours that they're not paying you for, just so you feel like you can stay caught up. So that's 20 extra hours, but that 20 extra hours, that's a part-time person that's working there. And if businesses don't know exactly how many people they need, they will always try to get more out of you
Sure.
than what you actually can give. And that's why we get burned out, is because in America, especially, we are horrible at taking PTO. We're horrible at taking
Yeah.
time for stuff. We're horrible at doing these things, which is one of the reasons why when I was doing a bunch of research on this book, I was looking at, okay, well, how do they do things in different countries? And one thing I like about Europe is in Europe, the servers won't let you access any work stuff after 8 p.m. It's a state federal mandate where you can't access anything at work, any email, any remote login, anything, unless you have special dispensation because you're a 24-hour business and it's within your specific 24-hour window, your 8-hour window when you work, so that you have to turn off. So you can't even access work after that. And I think that's a great idea, because
Yeah.
we can't do it. We need something more than us to say, no, you can't do this. You need to take this time off. You can't access stuff you don't know. It doesn't mean it won't stop you from thinking about it, but that's where you learning these different psychological tools and tips, because the problem with that is our bodies are still wired for 300,000 years ago of massive, full-on hardcore survival mode. Yet right now in the West, we are in the most prosperous era that we could possibly live in, where if you really think about it, this is kind of a timeline that I use with people. I'm like, so for about 295,000 years, it was hardcore survival, because that's when the first records of civilization started around 5,000 years ago. And then for the next 4,900 years, 4,200, 4,900 years or so, it was still a lot of survival, working 18 to 20 hours a day to just survive, even in city groups and things like that. And then the Industrial Revolution happened, where now machines started to be able to pick up a lot of that slack. So now we only had to start working about 12 hours a day. And now we're in an era where you can literally work between 5 to 8 hours a day and make enough to live in some areas of America, at least in the country. So if you think about that, we now have an extra like 50% or more time, where before it was all about survival, survival, survival. And so anxiety, depression, all these things that come up, all that stuff is because our body is still wired for, we should be working 18 to 20 hours a day to survive. But really, I could never leave this office again, and I could be perfectly happy here. I'd probably smell after a while. But I could never leave this office, because Walmart Plus, Amazon delivery, all these things deliver right to my door, and I would have all the food I need, changes of clothes, plenty of deodorant, all the stuff I could need, and I could make a living by doing therapy and doing life coaching online.
Right.
And that's the world we live in. But yet our body, which is the 80% of where all of our emotions begin, is in our body, and it begins in fear/survival mode. And for a lot of people, they don't like hearing that all of our emotions start from that fear/survival mode. Well, then, so their favorite thing to ask me, what about joy? What about happiness? How does that work? And I'm like, well, think about it. When you've been in a really happy, joyful, amazing situation, did the thought ever cross your mind, will I ever be this happy again? Will I ever feel this way again? When is this going to end? That's that fear. That's that stuff that's creeping in, because we naturally want more of that. That's what we chase. That's why they've been able to use social media and the different algorithms and the different way of designing these platforms to trigger those feelings in your brain, to where it's like, oh, I'm reconnecting with these people by going on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. I now understand them. I know them. I know what's going on in their lives. Yeah, a curated maybe 1% of their total life, you know. How often do you see people posting on Facebook that isn't in like some private Facebook group? My life is horrible. Everything's falling apart. My wife has cancer. I have cancer. We're broke. All these things. You never see that. You always see the perfectly posed, curated pictures. And then that creates this envy cycle and this desire cycle that
And
then,
the comparison,
yep,
comparing ourselves with them.
yep. But
Yeah.
it's reminding yourself how many, then that's why I always ask myself whenever I see those photos that you can tell are posed, how many pictures do they have to take to get that photo? 75? How much time did they waste trying to get that one particular photo? Was it 2 hours, 3 hours? Is this trip only for them to get these pictures to do this stuff so that they can make a little bit more money so they can go on the next trip where it looks like they're living a lavish lifestyle, but really it's exhausting because every trip is about making sure that they get the right product placement, that they're placed right, that everything is
Everything's
right,
perfect.
everything is perfect. And perfection is exhausting.
Oh, I
So
know. I tried to live it. Trust me, it's
yeah,
not a fun place. And you
yeah.
never reach it. You never reach it.
No,
You
well,
will
it's
never
it's an
reach perfection.
impossibility because we're
Mm-mm.
human beings. So
Yep.
we're naturally flawed. That's why I
Yeah.
love the phrase "my progress, not perfection," because that's what it
Yeah.
comes down to. The more that you look at your life, and if you can look at your last day and say, I did that one thing a little bit better, that's where that 1% per day model comes from. Because if you can look back at each day and say, I made that little bit of an improvement, and the most
Yes.
important thing about whenever you set goals and have improvement is always, always, always build in the ability for you to have a failure time, for you to have a
Yeah.
setback, for you to feel like you can't do it and be okay with saying, today I just can't do it. Because by building in, in my personal life, I have 3 cheat days a month where if I don't feel like doing anything for myself, I don't have to. If I don't have to, if I don't want to improve that day, I don't have to. I build in these cheat days where that's part of my goal process is I allow myself to say, I don't feel like it today. Today, I know I should get up at this time and do this stuff, but instead I'm going to sleep in because to me, that's more important. And so by building that in there, that's still part of my goal. So I'm not obliterating my goal by not doing it for one day. Instead, I'm using that part of the goal in order to continue towards my goal, which is giving myself a break sometimes, because you can't do mental health and improvement 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It just doesn't work because then you're
And you
so
don't feel
burned out.
guilty,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And you don't feel guilty because that's the thing that derails you most of the time when it
Yeah.
comes to goal setting is I didn't do it or I missed this week. So therefore I have to start all over again, which means I'm like, no, just because you miss some time doesn't mean it negates everything that you've already
Right.
done. It just means you got to pick back up and start. Maybe you have to start a step back because you have to start again. It's like going to the gym, right? You go to the gym, and if you go to the gym religiously for 6 months and then there's like an injury or something, and then you're off for like a couple of weeks, and then you have to start up again, you can't start back at the weight you were doing before. You have to drop it down and build back up again. Does that
But you're
mean that
not going all the way back to the very beginning either,
exactly?
right?
Exactly. And that's the thing that people miss because their brain goes, oh, great, I have to go all the way
Yep.
back to the beginning again. That's for me, that's one of the issues I have with the with AANA programs is that it's when someone relapses, it's like, well, you have to come back in and you have to go back to 0 days now. And I'm like, I don't like that because it's punishing someone for being human when really, yes, you did screw up, but you shouldn't lose all of your days for that because
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. If you made 365 days, if you made 1 year of staying sober and then you screw up one day, that doesn't erase the last year.
And it's
It's just,
expected. It's expected for them to
it
fall
is.
off. It's
Well,
expected.
their thing is relapse is part of recovery,
Right.
but yet, if the relapse is part of recovery, then why do you get reset to zero? Well, a part of it's an accountability thing, which I understand. But
Right.
I think if they're able to speak and be accountable to it, then they shouldn't lose all that time. And I really honestly don't think they really do lose all that time. It's just a mechanism that they use to try to help enforce accountability because I know for a lot of my clients, what I am to them is I am accountability to them. And
Yes.
so I have a lot of clients come in and say, yeah, I almost did that thing that I do, but I didn't want to explain to you why I did it. So I didn't do it because I didn't want to have to explain to you why I did what I did. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So basically you're telling me I'm Jiminy Cricket. They're like, yes, you're basically Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder saying, you're gonna have to explain this to me if you do the thing. And so that's one of those things, right? That sometimes we need that. We need an outside person where really there's nothing I can do. I can't punish them if they don't do what they're supposed to do. But for them, having to explain themselves is like this own little punishment for themselves.
Right.
I really don't want to have to do that. I'll explain it to anybody else, but I don't want to explain it to you.
That's so funny. I know I have accountability partners and I feel the same way. I'd rather not have to go throw myself at the mercy of the person, instead, I'm going to go do that thing so that I don't
So
have
I
to
don't have
explain
to explain
myself.
myself. Yeah. And that, but also you really think about it, that is the power of social groups. Again, that comes back
Right.
to that comes back to the 300,000 years of our evolution is we live and died for 200 and, for like 298,000 years in groups of 25 to 100. Now we're in a way where we can now be seen, witnessed, viewed, and discussed by groups of thousands of people, and our brain just can't handle that because it's too much to even process. That's the other thing that's going on in the world today is we are stuck in information burnout, information overload. There's too much information, there's too much content, there's too much stuff for us to be able to prioritize anything. And so that's one of the other difficult things. And that's why I think burnout is more of the thing that's going on in the world today, because it creates burnout's one of those things that people don't understand. They think it's like, oh, it only means work. It means I'm working too hard and I'm just burned out. But really, burnout first starts with is actually it's a systemic collapse in various areas of your life. So the first place where burnout started for me when I was profoundly burned out about 14 years ago, about 14, 15 years ago, was I first started with the social withdrawal piece. That's the first red flag is you need more solitude. You find yourself dodging social events, needing long breaks alone. You stay out, you begin to avoid work meetings, begin to avoid the interaction with coworkers after work, with your friends after work. You just become more isolative. That's the first step where you start to begin being burned out. Then the next place that at least I went into was I began to neglect my own self-care. I started showering less. I started wearing the same clothes. I started, I started breaking down these self-care habits because I didn't feel like I was worthy because I was so tired. It was like, I'll skip it. It's okay. I don't need to do this right now. I don't smell that bad. Those kind of things. And then the next thing that happens is you get into relationship issues. Then you become so mentally and emotionally disconnected that you consider, just stopping your, you don't spend time with your family. You don't spend time with your close friends. You start to disengage from being romantic with your partner. And this is often a defensive tactic to avoid facing your burnout because you don't want to burden other people. How often is it when you're burned out or when you're depressed or when you're super anxious? No, I don't want to tell my friends what's going on. I don't want to talk to other people about this because I don't want to burden them with what's going on with me because their life is busy too. They have so much other stuff going on. How many times do we think that? A lot.
A
And then the
lot.
last place where this is where burnout often gets seen is when you're so burned out, you begin to disengage from work. This is when you're so mentally and emotionally disconnected that you frequently consider quitting. You consider changing jobs. Your work performance begins to deteriorate. Your boss starts to recognize. This is when, if you don't get immediate intervention at this time, this is when your whole life begins to fall apart. And really, if you recognize the symptoms early on, you can begin to do these little changes to create better boundaries, to do these different things, to begin deeper connection with people again, to discuss what's going on with you, to do better self-care practices, which really does only take 15 minutes a day. And that's what people don't understand. But the pattern I've been doing since I've figured this out so I was burned out probably for about 2 to 3 years before I actually started working on it. And then And basically my burnout started because when I was like, what, around 28, and this is almost 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, my mom got sick with a autoimmune disorder where only 5,000 people on the planet had it. And it basically was liquefying her muscles and her joints from the inside.
Oh,
So she went from a healthy, early 50-year-old to basically having the body of a 90-year-old in chronic pain within the space of a year. And she ended ultimately ending up committing suicide about 3 years later.
sorry.
And so that sent me for a big spin because I was with her the last 2 weeks before she decided to do that. And she told me she was going to do it. I was working in the system at the time. I was a therapist, I was a social worker. So I told her doctors, I told her psychiatrist, I told all these people what's going on. And they basically said to me, no, as long as she completes this program, which was a pain care program, she'll be fine. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I do this for a living. This is not going to be fine. She's going to do this. She needs deeper help than this. And they said, no. And I'm like, but this is what I do. This is who I am. This is what I do for a living. And they were still like, no. And so the system that I've been working for about 8 years then failed me completely.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sent me into a spin, questioning everything, depression, grief, anxiety. I then decided to stop doing therapy for a little while. I started a company where I'd help nonprofit companies, for-profit companies create foundations. I did some real estate investing, real estate and insurance, those kind of things. And then 2008 happened. And so then we lost everything. Everything went to hell. So then we had to move in with my in-laws with my brand new newborn son. And at this point, I realized I was at my most profound when burned out and so I had to stop and ask myself that question. What kind of husband do I want to be? What kind of man do I want to be? What kind of father do I want to be? So it was interesting that if it wasn't for the collapse, I probably would have kept going. Like
As long as your body held up, right?
Yeah, as long as I held up. But
Yeah.
because of that, it forced me to look at this and go, oh, wow, I didn't even realize how much I was beginning to distance from everybody, how much I was denying and pretending like everything was fine. And really, I was a shell. I was a robot, just doing what I had to do to make it through the day. And so I began to go back I studied a lot of Eastern religion and a lot of different things and mindfulness work and those kind of things when I was in college. And so I went back to figuring out, okay, what can I do? Well, I had a newborn, so I didn't have tons of time. I couldn't do 30, 40, 50 minutes of like meditation and stuff. So I devised a plan where I meditated for 3 minutes and journaled for 2. And then at lunchtime, I meditated for 3 minutes and journaled for 2. And then before bed, I meditated for 3 and journaled for 2. And most people are like, 3 minutes of meditation, what is that going to do for you? You need to meditate at least 15, 20, 30 minutes for it to be any good. But I'm like, well, when's the last time you sat for 3 minutes with your thoughts? How many thoughts do you have in a 3-minute period when you're just trying to sit and be silent and be calm? And so the method I use is I sit and I meditate and I just see what my brain churns up. And then whatever the thing that churns up the most, that's what I journal on. And then I work on that thing that day. And then I check in with myself at noon. I meditate and I say, okay, is that thing still churning up? Have I kind of processed through this? And then I journal on that. Am I making progress? Am I not making progress? And then I do that in the evening. And sometimes this thing happens 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, a month. Sometimes the same thing comes up again and again. But I continually work on it and I use that 15 minutes, 5 minutes 3 times a day to keep me on track of just being aware of what's going on inside of me. And that awareness is the thing that allowed me to change. Did it happen overnight? No. Did I do this perfect every day, 7 days a week? No, I didn't. Some days I was lucky if I got it 3 times a week. Sometimes I was lucky if I got a full 7 days. And sometimes I was lucky if I got 2 days a week. It just depends. But as long as I continued to do it and I built in even that if I didn't do it, as long as I was mindful, that's what was important. As long as even if I had just thought about, oh, I should do this, I'm like, I'm going to count that as a win. That's the thing. You need to make it as simple as possible. But by recognizing these things, it allows you to just see what's going on in here. Because when it comes to the fear story that we tell ourselves every day, because our fear story is survival and it starts in our body. And so the only thing that we can do is if we can learn to manage how our body reacts to the stories we're telling ourselves or to the events we find ourselves in, that then changes our thinking.
Yes. Yeah. I love that you're really dialing in on small steps, baby steps, because I know for me, I can tend to just get, I can look at the whole picture and get overwhelmed. And so I have learned that I take things in small steps, and that's really helpful. And you can do meditation for 3 minutes and then journal for 2 minutes and just start with that. And yeah, it's not going to be perfect every time, but you will find that as you continue to do it, you're going to have more clarity in your mind. You're going to get more clarity in your goals and everything that you want to do in life, and even clarity within yourself. I mean, that's a lot of times where I have my aha moments about myself, is in those times of quiet. And it is a struggle, but it is the baby steps.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I'd like to teach people when I first see them is I teach them what I call my emotional management plan. This is a plan that you can do in about 5 to 6 minutes. And what it does is it attacks the fear story from 3 different states. It attacks it from the psychological, the physiological, and the physical. And people are like, well, isn't physiological and physical the same thing? And I'll explain how no, it's not. So the way the emotional management plan goes is the first thing you do is you do box breathing. Box breathing is a scientifically designed type of breathing that basically stops your parasympathetic nervous system, which is where the fear adrenaline problem lives. That's the biological basis for fear. And there's also the psychological basis for fear. So you need to understand there's 2 different places that fear is in the body. But where it always starts, 80% of it is in the body. And most people are like, that doesn't, I thought fear was a mental thing. No, fear starts in the body.
It's stored in the body.
It's stored in the body, and it starts in the body because that's 300,000 years of survival.
Right.
And so the first thing you do, what box breathing is you breathe in for 4 seconds and you hold for 4 seconds. You breathe out for 4 seconds and then you hold empty for 4 seconds. And you do that 4 times. And you can do this. You can do it where you can do, 3, 3, 3, 3, and then do that 3 times. You can do it that way, but the 4, 4, 4, 4, 4 times tends to work the best. Like with my youngest, who's 12, I had him do it 2, 2, 2, 2, because his lungs are smaller. 4, and I had him do it 4 times, and that helped him get back to sleep one night when he was having a nightmare, and he went back to sleep. And so it's these kind of things. It can be adjusted to what works for you, but what it does is it tells your body biologically in that moment, there is no tiger. I am not being physically attacked.
I'm safe.
That is where our body always goes. The most easy example I give people is you get an email from your boss and it says, hey, I need to talk to you this afternoon, right? Right. That's the exact reaction I get from everybody. They're like, oh,
yeah.
No, but it's like, but really, so you could sit there and let's say you have 5 hours until that meeting. So you have 5 hours to stew and to think about it, and to worry about all the things you could have, should have, would have, might have, not, didn't do as best you could have done, right? But you go in and you find out, oh, I just wanted to commend you. You had the best numbers of the last quarter. You're actually getting a bonus. Congratulations. Here you go. Good job. And it's like, oh, I didn't expect that at all. I was going in here ready to fight for my life. And yet it turned out to be, I did a good job. Whoa, okay, that was a left turn. So what I would have you do in those moments when you begin to have that fear story is you box breathe. Then you journal for a minute or 2. What's the story your brain is now telling you? What's the story your body is telling you? Because your body has a very specific story, and it goes something like this. I'm being physically threatened. If I don't stop this threat, I'm going to be dead under a bridge within a week. That's where your body always goes. Your body always goes to, I'm dead. I'm going to lose everything. I'm dead.
You're right. You are right.
Psychologically, your brain jumps into that and says, yeah, you're right, because you didn't do this and you didn't do that. You didn't do these things. I can think of a million things you could have done better. And this is why you are dead under a bridge. Enjoy. So that then triggers the adrenal response.
Yes.
And the problem with adrenaline is it's designed for you to run and fight for your life. But when you're sitting in an office chair, you're sitting somewhere still, adrenaline stays in your stomach, which is why people get GI issues.
Yep.
It stays in your heart and lungs, which is why it feels like your lungs are going to explode. Your heart's trying to jump out of your chest. But really, the part where it's most insidious is it's in your brain.
Yep.
It speeds up your brain by a factor of about 10. because when your brain is sped up, you can react faster. So if you're being attacked by a tiger or a bear, you want your brain to be 10 times faster because you might be able to dodge just quick enough where they miss you. You might be able to do these things. So it slows down time by a factor of 10.
Mm-hmm.
So for that, every 1 second you were feeling that adrenaline anxiety, it feels like a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're sitting there for a minute, all of a sudden you feel like you've been trapped in this hell of anxiety and fear for half an hour, for an hour. And you look at your watch and you're like, oh, wow, it's only been like 2 minutes. How's that possible? I thought I've been stuck in this forever, because that's how your body feels. So by box breathing, you're now turning that system off. By writing it out, you're now able to put the story here on the page.
It
Then you go
loses
to
its power. Once you take
Yes.
that thought out of your brain, whether it's you
Yeah.
speak it or you write it, it
Yeah.
loses its power.
Yeah, because when you hear it, when you see it, especially, is when you write something, you're pulling it from the feeling side of your brain, which is the right side of your brain, to the logic side of your brain, which is the left side of your brain, and then you're pulling it out and putting it on the page.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do that, you're forcing it to go to logic, and logic looks at feelings like they're insane. It makes absolutely no sense.
True.
Why would you think that's going to happen? There's no evidence that says that's going to happen. And then your brain's like, well, yeah, but what about this, this, and this?
Yeah.
We did that. Don't you remember? Here, look, go look. I'll show you proof. And so then you go and exercise for like 2 to 5 minutes. You go do a quick power walk, do some jumping jacks, go do some wall push-ups, go do something to move the adrenaline from your stomach, heart, lungs, and brain and get it to where it belongs. Your arms and your legs. Get it out of there. Then go back and read what you wrote. If you still believe what you wrote, if like ranking on a scale of 1 to 10, if it's 5 or above, do it again. Box breathe again. Go write again. Go exercise again. You have to change that, because if you don't do that, this will take you straight to hell every single time. And that's why that process is so effective, because again, it's attacking it from the psychological, the physiological, and the physical. So you're literally changing you in the environment. The environment doesn't change. What's going to happen next will change, though, because your reaction will now not be based on fear. It will now be based in logic. I have this as a poster, which I'll send to you so people can download.
Okay.
Because I found it's one of the most effective things, that when our brain starts to spin, when the story starts to spin, when our body starts to hijack us, and when these deep emotional scars that are genetically historical scars of survival, that's the thing that also they found, which I find amazing, is human beings may not have instinctual stuff like fear or like those kind of things where they can get up and move and, walk and talk and do all the things they need to do. Well, deers don't talk, but you know what I mean. When they can go do their thing pretty much an hour. What our genetic trauma gets passed down from generation to generation. They've proven that. But also what they found recently is that trauma, big T or little t trauma, whatever it is stored in the brain as an active occurrence.
Right.
It's not stored as a past occurrence.
Correct.
So whenever you get re-triggered with any kind of traumatic event, it shows back up as if it's actually actively happening now. And they can prove it they proved it by doing fMRI studies on assault survivors, on combat veterans, on these different people, to show that it is literally active in the body now. So being aware of it is the most important thing, and recognizing the triggers is the most important thing, and having the ability to do this stuff to derail that story is the thing that will change the way that you view everything. If I could have anybody do anything that's listening to this, even if you do nothing else, just box breathe. Box breathing alone will stop you from going down that path.
Right.
Because it changes the entire way your body is functioning in that moment.
And it's interesting because for years in my adult life, I was just in survival mode completely. I mean, that's just how so you can imagine where my anxiety, like I was always right here. And then if
you're
something
always snorkel
happens,
depth, as I like to call it.
Yeah, I'm always what?
You're always snorkel depth, as I like to call it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it's true. And then God forbid if something happens, I'm not very far from hitting the ceiling, right?
Yep.
And just, it took me a long time to recognize that. It took me a long time to kind of work through that. So I'm not
Mm-hmm.
in survival mode anymore. But
Yeah.
I had a podcast the other day, and I love what this person said. She had said she had a therapist tell her one time
Mm-hmm.
that if we've always been in that survival mode or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
we need to teach our bodies not to be in that survival
Exactly.
mode.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, that's such a simple sentence. It hit me. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And then I started looking within myself, and I started
Mm-hmm.
looking at more ways that I can do some self-care and get
Yeah.
my anxiety down and manage it
Yeah.
better.
Mm-hmm.
It's
And that's the
amazing.
thing, is that what I call that is, I call it homeostatic chaos. We are, when you're stuck in survival mode, when things are calm, we then unintentionally look for ways to stir it up,
Oh, absolutely.
because we feel like if I don't stir it up, then something else is going to happen. So I need to keep the momentum moving, because if I don't keep it going, then bad stuff is going to happen.
Right. Something out of my control.
Yes, something out of my control. So if I create the chaos, then I can control the chaos.
Correct.
But that's a complete oxymoron. You can't control chaos. It's chaotic for a reason.
Right.
But that's why
But that's your normal.
Yeah, but the only thing we can control is how we react to things. That's the only control we have. There is no other control. And so we can control how our body is reacting to things by breathing, by changing, because breathing is the only thing that is an automatic system in our body that we can control. But breathing changes and affects everything.
It does.
Because breathing is the first thing that begins to raise your heart rate.
Mm-hmm.
If you breathe fast, you and I just sat here and we just took 5 or 6 quick breaths, we would feel our heart rate increase.
Mm-hmm.
We'd feel our blood pressure increase. We'd feel that happen. We would get into that state. That's why slowing everything down and doing those very simple process of box breathing and becoming very mindful of your breath, of then becoming very mindful of what the story is saying, then go out and get that adrenaline out of your system and put it where it belongs, and then come back and say, okay, do I still believe this story? If you can just do those things, that 5 minutes that you take to do that will change the next hour, the next 2 hours, the next event that happens.
Mm-hmm.
You'll begin to start doing that more automatically, where you're like, oh, I recognize what this is. Okay, I just need to do this stuff and I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the process, is as we do that, it's the most simple and effective thing to do, but yet that's the thing. It's like, well, that's too simple. That won't work. And I'm like, well, I can tell you, this is the first thing I teach every therapy client, every life coaching client that I have, is this process.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is basically as close to an instant fix as I can give anybody to begin to manage their anxiety, to manage their fear. And I say, anytime you have any kind of emotion that spikes, if your depression spikes, if your anxiety spikes, if anger spikes, if fear spikes, if sadness spikes, still do this process. Because this isn't just for fear, because you have to remember, every single feeling starts with the biological body fear story. From joy to sadness and everything in between starts with the body. So if you can control the body, then you can control all the other thoughts and feelings that happens, because then your brain gets in line. Because your body is telling your brain everything's fine. Because 80% of the nerves go from the body to the brain, not from the brain to the body.
Right. And one of the things that I use to help get my stress out is I have a little trampoline right outside my office. And I go out there and I'll set my little timer for a minute and jump. And I've had back surgery, so I can't go real hard yet. But and I do before I get on podcast, because it gets my energy up too, and the blood flowing, and it feels good.
I agree. And that's the thing, right? So doing these things and figuring out what your plan is for you is the thing that's going to change everything for you. Because I can give you all these different tools, but I have people come in and say, well, I didn't do the tools in exactly the way that you told me to do it. I did it this way, but it worked for you. I'm like, okay, then do that. Like, you're not going to get mad at me. I'm like, no, did it work for you?
If it worked for you,
that's all I want. Because there is no one size fits all.
Right. It's a journey.
That's why I try and give people as many tools as possible. And I say, put these tools together the way that works for you, and then tell me. Because I might be able to tell that to somebody else because I'll be able to tell by their disposition, maybe this way will work instead,
Right.
because I'm still a student as well. That's one of the reasons why I've been in this field for 24 years now, is that I'm able to be a student still. And I learn as much from my clients as I do from all the
Yeah.
stuff that I read, all the podcasts I listen to, all the
Mm-hmm.
podcasters I talk to, all the different things, because all of us are doing. There's one thing I've learned in life, and especially in being a therapist and a life coach for so long, is that we're all making it up as we go along. There is
So
no
true.
magical answer. I don't have any magical wisdom. I have a lot of extra knowledge just because of all the stuff I've done. And I've spent
Right.
my entire life talking to thousands and thousands of people, helping them work through problems. So I have extra knowledge, but I don't have any magical stuff. All I'm giving you is the benefit of my experience, and you can
Mm-hmm.
either take it or leave it, and that's okay.
Yeah. So what would you like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I guess I'd like to leave them with that, if you really want to change, just give yourself, start with 5 minutes a day.
Mm-hmm.
Start with box breathing and just take some time to listen to what's going on inside of your head and challenge every story that comes up. Because in my experience, the story we tell ourselves, if we would never, ever, ever tell anyone that we love that story about themselves.
So
But yet
true.
for ourselves, we always are our own harshest and worst critics. But all we can do is learn to live with compassion for ourselves, because without having self-compassion, change becomes extra difficult.
That is so true. And if the listeners wanted to reach out to you, how could they get a hold of you? Of course, we'll have this all listed
Yep.
too, but it's good to say it too.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Small Changes Big Impact, of the number 4 and the letter U, or you can find me at smallchangesbigimpact.net. There you can find my book, Beat Burnout in 15 Minutes a Day, How to Prioritize Yourself Without Losing What Matters Most. It's also a membership site where for $50 a month, you can join it. And it has, I think like right now, like if we read 3 master classes on different thoughts, and then like 14 weeks worth of things on how to beat burnout, stress, anxiety, all those different things, along with worksheets and different things to do that. Because what I really want to do is I want people to recognize that it doesn't take much to change. And so I make everything that they have. My book, you can read each chapter in like 15 minutes a day. And then each worksheet takes about 10 to 15 minutes to do. That is a companion to that chapter, so that you can move through these processes and learn these things that will change your life. And even if all you do is just box breathe, I guarantee you just box breathing will change the way that you interact with the world.
I agree. I agree 100%. That has been the thing that has saved me more than once. So, well, thank you so much. This has been great information. We can't get enough information out there about mental health and, things that we can do to help our mental health. Every little bit counts. Just remember, everybody, it's small steps. You can start with small steps. It's okay.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, it was.